Hello, my name is Pete Wassell. I'm the founder of Augmate. Today I'll be talking about security for wearables, mostly on smart glasses, but I'll use mobile, I'll refer to mobile, and also existing wearables as reference models to how we can better secure smart glasses. Companies have done a pretty good job when it came to really using MDM, so mobile device management, or EMM, in companies, okay? But when it translates over to the wearable side, they really haven't done a good job there. So this was a report that came out of Dimensional Research. It's really on the mobile side, and it showed that about 95% of companies allow mobile devices to connect to their network. So out of that 95%, 75% allow personal devices to connect to the network, and the remaining 20% of the 95% are issued by the enterprise themselves. So that would be a little bit more secure. Now, there's good reason of why you'd want employees to connect with mobile, right? You could be preparing for a meeting with your boss's boss, and you need to access files, on the company directory in some folder. So there's good reasons. People do work in the cafeteria. They might do work on their commute on a train or whatever. So there's good reasons why folks need to be able to access the corporate directory. You just need the right safeguards in place. There was a report that came out from Harvard Business School, it's actually Harvard Law School, that was really looking at the liability of wearables and mobile connecting to the network. And they asked IT professionals at a director or above level, so this is C-suite, CIOs, how cyber literate they were. And they self-ranked themselves as pretty poor. So about 25% of your executives at corporations really knew nothing about cybersecurity. So pair this with the volumes of wearables that are hitting the market and the volumes of wearables that enterprises plan to use, and that becomes a significant problem. You're gonna notice in this report, I use the Guy Fawkes mask. I love Anonymous, but this has kind of become the symbol of hacking, right, for the market. So you'll see that throughout my presentation. These are still mobile stats, and my question is, what's the employee's role in upholding cybersecurity? And wearables are going to enter the enterprise no matter what, right? So they're either going to be a personal device that comes in or a company-issued device, but one way or another, wearables are going to be affecting the network. So it's really important to safeguard both the enterprise data and personal data. And there's reasons for both. And there's ways to do both, and later in the presentation, I'll cover some of those methods. And the issue ends up being that as you get more wearables, there's more endpoints, so more access to that data, and that's what ends up being the problem. So the cost of security incidents is significantly high. One of the things that happens is these wearable makers, they rush to get their device into the market, right? So they want to be first to market. They want to Their brand name wants to be referenced with that particular device. And so in that rush to get things into market, they're not necessarily thinking about security. Now, it's not necessarily that it's the hardware problem. A lot of it has to do with corporate governance and policies and even the software that's on the device. But they're not really thinking about security. And there's this whole debate of whether this should be self-regulation or government compliance. So the companies say, hey, we're capitalists. We just want to get our devices out there, and you shouldn't stop us from doing it. The government says privacy is a fundamental right, and we should be involved because we need to protect that of our citizens. So it's kind of an interesting debate that's going on. So some of the stats here have to do with smartwatches and fitness trackers. And it's really about the bad policies and bad habits that are used. So 69% of wearable device owners, they forego any kind of logon credentials. They just log on automatically. 56% of wearable owners use their devices to access things like Dropbox or Microsoft Office or other things, and that is a link to data and corporate data. Could be a problem. Now, again, pair this with some of the volumes that we're seeing. So according to Forbes, they say nearly half of all consumers will have a wearable device by 2019. Right now, the number is about 20% of the population. So in other words, if you've got a company of 500 employees, 100 of them right now have a wearable device, right? And then so some of those are accessing the network. They also say that by 2025, more data will be generated by wearables and sensors than all other sources of data combined. So it's becoming pretty significant. So this is a report that came out of Forrester, really interesting. This is, they put this out last month. It shows about 5 million smart glass devices will be in the enterprise in the next 5 years. And they say by 2025, the number will be around 14 million, okay? So it's significant because, well, number one, I'll talk about the methodology. They went through the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and they found 14 skills across 264 job roles where they identified, without a doubt, that smart glasses would benefit those workers in those jobs, right? So then they were able to apply this to some of the forecasts from the device manufacturers and figured out the rollout. So it's pretty impressive. There's reason to believe that there's going to be a fourth industrial revolution and that wearables will be a part of it. It'll be a combination of wearables and IoT, but it will be big. So really, they end up saying that it's about 8% of all workers will be using smart glasses by 2025. These are some of the common vulnerabilities in wearables. And again, when you pair this with some of the volumes, ABI research said that 200 million wearable devices were used by consumers by the end of 2015, and they expect this number to be about 780 million by the end of 2018. More wearables on the network. And I'll give you an example. So hackers can use this denial of service attack. And what they do is they'll have a fake firmware update that shows up on the wearable. The user goes to do the update, and it'll make the wearable useless for the person. It'll drain the battery. It'll block them from the website. And more importantly, if that wearable is paired with a mobile device, the mobile device can be compromised. So some of the tools that hackers use are Bluetooth sniffers. So this gives the ability to pick up information that's communicated via Bluetooth. And most folks don't know, but you can encrypt Bluetooth data, but most companies don't put that into place. So in other words, if it's unencrypted and it's going over Bluetooth, and someone has a Bluetooth sniffer, they can read that data without any kind of problem. So really, IT departments need to track when and where wearables come into a workplace and where they end up going within a workplace. If an employee was fired, terminated, they resigned, you'd need to be able to track down that wearable and perhaps do a remote wipe of the data and information on that wearable. And it gets more complicated. You can have unauthorized wearables on a network, or you might have authorized wearables but unauthorized apps that are running on those wearables. So it gets complicated, and the IT department really has to understand how to protect on both those situations. So from a hardware perspective, we know that the data is valuable. They say that data on these devices could be worth 10 times as much as having a credit card number. So pretty significant. And so you really want hardware that has remote lock capabilities, implement hard password policies, or even use biometric authentication. So biometric is fingerprint or facial scan. That's harder than hacking with a password. And it's really important because hackers got an ability to triangulate information. So there's certain data about yourself that you can't change. You can't change your social security number. You can't change, or not easily, can't change your birth date. So when you have this paired with location and other things, you can actually identify who someone is, and that becomes a problem. If you read the license agreements on these wearables, if you actually read the license agreement, you probably wouldn't use it with what they say they can do with the data. Our company actually removes most of the access to the online services, like wipes that out so that there isn't any kind of connection, to be able to transfer data. Some of this information has to do with the fitness trackers and smartwatches. And companies are starting to give discounts to insurance companies based on the fact that they're using a wearable, okay? So let's say you get a 20% discount on your insurance, but the company is collecting the data. So you could be in situations where the company, let's say after 3 months, says, if you don't go see a doctor, you're not going to get the 20% discount. You're going to get a 15% discount. So it puts some ethical considerations into play that we never really had to consider in the past. In fact, the Federal Trade Commission went to Congress and said, you need to, this is really for hardware manufacturers, but you need to have legislation that says what information is being captured by a device and who is it going to be shared with. So they're putting out legislation now that has to do with that. The area, so Augmented Reality for Enterprise Alliance, interviewed our CTO on how to use or implement security on wearables. And they came up with this interesting kind of architecture approach, and they said what they see is 4 areas that are distinct and should be addressed kind of differently. So what's the transport mechanism of data? What's the application that's running? The wearable itself, so the hardware that's being used, and then any integration to a back-end ERP type system are 4 areas that are really important. So we think that this is a pretty good starting place. And the area came out with this report, and they said, really, it's this constant ability to record data and marry that up with reality, where you end up having these interesting issues of trying to keep track and keep those devices secure. So you really need the processes, protocols, and response solutions so that the company's not compromised. At the end of the day, it really comes to managing the weak links. And the weak links have to do with usually data transport and data storage. So there's existing standards that can be used, right? So we looked at HIPAA. There's some companies that are using wearables in a healthcare setting. You look at a company like Augmate, who is using Google Glass in a healthcare setting. They've got great advice. Don't share accounts, auto log out, after a certain amount of time. And there's upwards of about 25% of the applications that are in the healthcare area. So looking at something like HIPAA makes a lot of sense. There's been reports of hackers who have broken into the IT area of a hospital through hacking, and then they held the patient data hostage and made hospitals pay money in order to get that data back. So that's a real problem. And then just from a personal information standpoint, folks might not want to have their information shared with employers, insurance companies, or the public. IEEE advice, real good stuff here. Strong password, 15-minute forced reauthentication if the device is idle. Prevent someone from changing their identity without reauthentication. These are things that are pretty significant. You got to realize in an enterprise setting, devices are going to get passed around. You're going to go from the first shift to the second shift, and you need a way to be able to properly log people off, log them in, that type of thing. So my question is, does your company have a security policy? If not, it's probably time to start thinking about it. There's really a wide range of video and audio surveillance opportunities, again, creating more access to pathways of data that you really wouldn't want at your company. So being able to prevent against those vulnerabilities is something you want to do. It's really hard to ignore some of these numbers. 20% of folks already have wearables, so it's already an issue. So in addition, with collecting data, when it comes to still images, video, or even audio, you need almost a special set of policies because there's laws that are different in state to state when you record employees. So if they're recording a procedure and there's a worker that's in the view of the recording, that could be an issue. So you have to know the laws and have the right kinds of policies. Enterprise workers do have a lower expectation of privacy, but at the same time, we do want to prevent people stealing personal information and obviously corporate data. So what else can companies do? You might want to have data breach insurance. You might want to have cyber liability insurance. You want to ensure that your network is properly patched when it comes to security patches. These are all things that should be obvious, but companies don't necessarily do. You want to make sure data is encrypted. Access control is implemented. Explain the business purpose for using wearables with your employees, and then have training and ongoing training. All very important. And some advice that I saw that was really interesting, if you go to buy a wearable, Google the name of that wearable and hack or hacking with it just to see if there's any other vulnerabilities that you need to care about. This is more advice on wearables. I think I'm pretty short on time. I'm not going to go through these all. Some more advice from Area. I'm just going to, and it's always good to have security when it comes to implementing wearables. But I'm just going to get to one thing pretty quickly here. And this was a lessons learned that we had. So Augmate's it's a cloud-based platform for managing smart glasses for enterprises. And we thought we were pretty innovative by keeping everything in the cloud. And what we learned was that in Europe and other places, they're not so keen on keeping their information on the cloud. And in Europe, in particular, with moving data, they're kind of funny when you go from country to country. But even in the US, you've got defense companies, you've got companies that are highly secure, and they wanted an on-prem solution. So in addition to our cloud-based solution, we ended up taking our platform and we put it on Intel's IoT router. And this gave the ability to allow companies to do device management, user management, application management, these types of things with their smart glasses, but all fully contained on the premises of a company. So if there's security concerns about using the cloud, there are ways to do it on premise and do it all a little bit more contained. So if companies are comfortable with that, I think that's a reasonable solution. I'm Pete Wassell from Augmate. Thank you very much.